Welcome back to the OMB Law Board. I'm Simon Bennett and I have today Abbi Golightly, Family Law Partner at OMB, for a further chat on some of the Family Law Amendment Act changes in June 2025. So Abbi, welcome back.
Thanks, Simon. Glad to be back.
So we had a fair few comments from listeners and a couple of questions pursuant to our previous episode on this issue. So we thought we'd get back to those listeners and give them a little bit more feedback about some of the changes. And one of the comments and questions that we saw a little bit was about some of the further changes that had occurred as a result of this legislation. Can you dive into that for us, please?
Absolutely. As we touched on previously, there was a lot of changes. The first one that we have discussed in our earlier episode. Other most significant changes, the ones that I think impact people mostly, is the new consideration or the mandatory consideration of the impact of domestic and family violence on property settlements. It's now required under one of the relevant considerations in the legislation that the court, and therefore us when we're advising our clients, are required to consider the financial impact on a person's current or future circumstances if there has been a history of domestic and family violence during the relationship. So it's a difficult topic to touch on, and it's difficult to talk with our clients at some point in time. It can be quite traumatic and quite re-traumatising to go through it. But it's an important consideration of the fact that long-standing domestic and family violence can impact a party's future. It can impact their capacity to work if they are diagnosed with conditions such as post-traumatic stress disorder, if they are having to incur significant financial costs undergoing therapy and counselling to work through the trauma that they've experienced.
Yep.
So the future consideration looks at whether or not a party needs an adjustment from their property to take into account those ongoing financial impacts. And then the other way in which domestic and family violence is considered during property settlement is a consideration of the contributions that parties have made during a relationship. Have those contributions been made more difficult and therefore have more value because they have been made in circumstances where there has been domestic and family violence during a relationship?
Yeah, and all of that I think is fantastic. I really do. Obviously, I guess at the outset from an OMB perspective, we absolutely do not condone in any way, and we think it is abhorrent, any sort of domestic or family violence. But to have it codified into the legislation that it is a relevant consideration in a resolution of a family law dispute, I think is fantastic.
It's a really important validation of the impact of domestic and family violence, which, as you've said, is something that me as a practitioner, and I know everyone in the family law team here at OMB, absolutely take a very hardline stance in matters involving domestic and family violence. It's a really important recognition that these considerations need to be made to ensure that someone who has been that victim of domestic and family violence is appropriately considered what they need into the future.
That's I think that's a massive change. So thanks for clearing that up for us, Abbi. And the second, I think you indicated there was 2 points. So
there is 2 points, and this one's, I guess, a little bit more upbeat, I suppose.
Good.
We have talked about previously how pets are treated in a family law dispute.
I love talking about pets.
Love talking about pets, dog lovers all around.
Absolutely.
Now in the Family Law Act, we have a specific definition of pets as companion animals. And so these are animals, your dogs, your cats, birds, fish, that everyone, I guess proportionately in Australia, nearly every household has one, if not more pets. And these types of animals are considered now in a different light rather than just, it's like this chair.
Yep.
There are considerations applied to them in terms of who should own them. So if they are legally owned or registered in the name of one party, should that be transferred to another party, taking into account things like who paid for the pet, but also importantly, things like who looked after the pet, who walked the pet, who fed the pet.
So does that mean they're starting to look at animals less as property and more in a relationship sense?
They are. They're still defined as a special category of property,
Right.
but they're applying considerations which a lot of people would think are similar to that of where children should live.
Right.
I think, a reflection of modern day Australia in terms of our love of our animals. And importantly, they are considering the attachment of children to pets when determining which of the parties should retain a pet. So if there is a dispute and a pet is particularly attached, or a child is particularly attached, or the pet might have been acquired as an emotional support animal, a therapy animal, then the parent with whom those children are primarily living with is better placed to say that that pet should be transferred, or the ownership of that companion animal should be transferred to me.
It's an important relationship for a young child in their formative years with their pet.
Correct. And if they're going through the trauma of a relationship breakdown, seeing that their home is now two homes, and that transition, losing their companion animal and losing their little best buddy can be really traumatizing for children. So I think it's a really important recognition of the role that pets play in our families now.
That is absolutely a positive step. And I should say for all our listeners, Abbi has both her dogs in the office today. I'm surprised they didn't appear on the podcast today.
Look, I think that would just make it a little uncontrollable.
But we do, as a society, we do love our animals, and I think it's important and solid recognition for the relationship that people have with their dogs as part of a relationship breakdown.
Absolutely.
So, Abbi, thanks so much for clarifying those questions that our listeners had, and hopefully that has answered your queries, and we appreciate the continued feedback and comments. And Abbi, thanks so much for coming in yet again to answer questions for us.
More than happy to do so.